Today we'll be discussing urine formation in the nephron. It is important to understand that the upper part of each nephron is located in the renal cortex of the kidney, and the lower part of each nephron is located in the renal medulla of the kidney. And the circulatory vessels are correlated with the nephrons. These key points conclude that nephrons are correlated by tissues of the renal cortex and the renal medulla. There's also a network of blood vessels among this tissue. This means that substances secreted by nephrons go to the neighboring tissues of the kidney, and the majority return to the bloodstream through the blood vessels, and others are released through urination. So there are four main processes to how urine forms: glomerular filtration, tubular reabsorption, third, tubular secretion, and fourth, water reabsorption. So the first, which is glomerular filtration, so it transports water and all solutes but proteins from the blood plasma to the nephron. And this filtered fluid can be referred to filtrate. So second is tubular reabsorption. So this eliminates important substances, for example, sodium, from the filtrate and brings them into the blood for body systems to utilize again. So third is tubular secretion. This transports extra wastes and substances from the blood into the filtrate. Fourth and last is water reabsorption. So in this process, water is eliminated from the filtrate and it returns it to the blood to be used again by body systems. So glomerular filtration is a procedure that pushes part of the water and dissolved substances from the glomerulus into the Bowman's capsule. So the two factors that are involved are permeability of the capillaries of the glomerulus, and second is blood pressure. So take in that we're focusing on a single nephron, although there are millions working together at the same time. So capillaries in the glomerulus have pores in their tissue walls. So these pores are big enough to let the water plus the majority of dissolved substances in the blood plasma to effectively move along the capillaries and into the Bowman's capsule. So the pores are still small enough to avoid proteins and blood cells from coming in. So second is blood pressure. So the blood pressure in the glomerulus is very high. It is 4 times higher than the capillaries. So this strong movement of blood through the glomerulus allows for filtration. There are 4 main processes involved in urine formation. The first one is glomerular filtration. So water, salts, and other filtrate are transported from the glomerulus to the inside of the glomerular capsule. So second is tubular reabsorption. Nutrient molecules, sodium ions, and many solutes are actively reabsorbed from the proximal tubule into the peritubular capillary network, while at the same time water flows passively. Specific substances are actively secreted from the peritubular capillary network into the distal tubule in the tubular secretion. Water reabsorption, water is reabsorbed from the collecting duct through osmosis. Water reabsorption in the collecting duct increases the amount of the filtrate. So this filtrate is actually chemically very similar to the blood plasma. And the filtrate is identical to the blood plasma, not including proteins and blood cells. So the fluid that moves through the rest of the tubule must actually change because it cannot be identical to the urine, or many salts, water, and nutrients would be lost. Filtrate that passes among the proximal tubule is reabsorbed and brought back to the body. Both active and passive transport play a role in reabsorption. So, first, nutrients are actively reabsorbed. The cells of the proximal tubule have mitochondria, which use the energy of ATP to transport sodium ions, glucose, and many solutes back into the blood. Negatively charged ions will be involved and move passively, attracted by the electrical charge on the transported substances. So lastly, water is reabsorbed by osmosis and is reabsorbed into the blood flowing through the capillaries. And going back to our first point where we talk about how the filtrate that passes among the proximal tubule is reabsorbed and brought back to the body, you must understand that the proximal tubule is in the kidney and is the tubular section of the nephron that is located between the Bowman's capsule and the loop of Henle, and its purpose is the reabsorption of water and solutes and the secretion of hydrogen ions. So now the function of the loop of Henle is to reabsorb water and ions from the glomerular filtrate. So reabsorption takes place through both active and passive transport. So first, diffusion of water from the filtrate into neighboring capillaries and solutes diffuse the opposite path. Second, ascending limb of loop of Henle is impermeable to water. Solutes diffuse from the filtrate to neighboring capillaries. Third, active transport of sodium and passive transport of separate ions takes place in the thick section of the ascending limb, and no reabsorption of water occurs in this area of the nephron. And just by looking at this diagram, you can see how active and passive transport are involved in the reabsorption of the loop of Henle. Now on to reabsorption and secretion of the distal tubule. So the distal tubule is in the kidney, and it is the tubular section of the nephron that is located between the loop of Henle and the collecting duct. Its purpose is reabsorption of water and solutes and secretion of other substances. So passive reabsorption of negative ions takes place by electrical attraction. Potassium ions are actively released into the distal tubule from the bloodstream in the capillaries. Hydrogen ions are actively secreted from the blood in the distal tubule to regulate blood pH. And penicillin and other medications are secreted from the blood into the distal tubule. Overall, hormones manage reabsorption and secretion in the distal tubule. Reabsorption from collecting duct. So the filtrate coming into the collecting duct has high amounts of water. So because the collecting duct is very lengthy and it goes far into the medulla, the concentration of ions increases. This increase of ions is caused by the active transport of ions from the ascending loop of Henle, and this leads to passive reabsorption of water through osmosis from the filtrate in the collecting duct. Overall, hormones control the reabsorption and secretion. If the blood plasma is very concentrated, the permeability to water in the distal tubule and collecting duct increases. This leads to a higher amount of water being reabsorbed into the neighboring capillaries. And this is done to conserve water in the body.